Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm Randall Carlisle, along with my co-host Rachel Santizo, and our guest today is Austin Francom from a company called, what do you call your place?
A clinic.
A clinic.
Yes.
A clinic. That's the name. That's what I was coming called. Therapeutic Alternatives. And today I actually sought you out because I've been reading articles about, and I want to first of all say, since we are Odyssey House, that this is not something that we do at Odyssey House, just so you know off the top. But I've seen so many articles on using ketamine in a therapeutic way to deal with people's mental health issues. But I also notice, like on your webpage, you mentioned substance use issues. So can you sort of explain? We're glad to have you, and I'm not being skeptical, but I just wanted to point out that Odyssey does not endorse something like this. But I'm really curious how it all works. Because we know ketamine is abused by people on the street, but we know it's used for medical purposes. I probably had ketamine when I've been in for surgery, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you use it for mental health or substance use?
It's okay. So background with ketamine, the history of ketamine, it's used worldwide as an anesthetic drug, and because it's a very safe medicine, it can, you can induce anesthesia without necessarily needing somebody to kind of manage an airway. So it is legal and FDA approved for anesthesia. However, at low doses, ketamine kind of induces a psychedelic or dissociative state, which has been found to be beneficial for patients with trauma, depression, anxiety, and some benefit for addiction, not specifically for detoxing, but for aftercare. And for whatever reason, when people are in that dissociative state, the prevailing theory is that it helps build new neural pathways, new connections between neurons that actually provide patients a different way of looking at things, kind of rewires the way they think about their whatever illness they have, either their addiction or their mental health issues, and sometimes can be very healing in that state. It does have some abusability potential, but the way we provide it, we do it in a very safe and secure setting where licensed professionals are actually administering the medicine, and then we have a therapist and some sitters to kind of be able to provide a positive space for them. It's my belief that if you're going in to that with an intention to kind of heal and to kind of examine your problems, you end up pulling something positive and beneficial out of that experience.
So can you describe how it actually physically works? If I come into your clinic and I tell you I'm depressed all the time or something like that, then how does it work? What do you do? Do I go in a dark room and you put an IV in, and does a therapist talk to me? I mean, walk me through it.
Yeah, so we'll initially have an interview where we kind of discuss what their intention coming in, what problems that they want to work on, and we'll initially have a little discussion with them. We'll give them a private room where we were able to kind of talk to them about their medical history, what kind of issues they're trying to work on. We'll kind of set the stage for them. We call it flight instructions, where we'll kind of tell them what to expect, because it's a very bizarre and almost ineffable experience. We'll kind of give them some instructions. I'll then administer them a sub-anesthetic dose, a smaller dose than I would give people for anesthesia. And
IV.
We started, when we first started doing it, we did it mostly IV, but we found that feels a little more clinical, a little more sterile, so we do intramuscular injections mostly now. During that period of time, they'll be in a dissociative or the best way to describe it is kind of an out-of-body experience for about 30 to 40 minutes.
So I'm hallucinating? Or?
I wouldn't. It's more like hallucinations are possible, yeah. It's more like feeling like your body doesn't exist anymore and you're just... The way I describe it is like your default mode of operation. Your part of your brain that's noisy and always talking to you and has your defense mechanisms. That part of your brain kind of dissolves and you're kind of left to kind of look at your own consciousness. It's not necessarily a pleasurable experience. It can actually be very scary. Some patients feel like they're experiencing their own death. Some patients have more of a spiritual, divine experience. It just depends on what the person is coming into our clinic to deal with. So,
and are you talking them through? What is a therapist there saying, okay, if I think I'm dying or something here,
Yeah. So assuming in that scenario, if the experience is going kind of dark like that, we have a therapist. Like I said, my partner's very experienced with kind of help grounding them, making them feel safe. And then within, a few, 30 minutes, they usually come back to their body. And then we process with them about how that experience went. Try to put some language to that experience so they can kind of ingrain it into their memory. And then, then they go back to their waking lives and, go back to their therapist and able to take whatever that experience pulls out for them to therapy. And that's kind of what encapsulates what we do, yeah. So
it seems like there's two things. Is it comparable to the peyote?
Not. It does work. I would consider it a psychedelic, yes, but it tends to be, I think, in my personal opinion, because of the anesthetic properties, it feels more internal, whereas other psychedelics tend to feel like more of a external experience, more of an interaction with the outside world. This tends to be kind of a deeply personal, deeply introspective experience.
I've done therapy before, and I've done EMDR, and it's kind of, is it comparable to that, like visiting that space of like a trauma or some kind of experience and digging into that and facing that?
Yeah.
And then discussing it?
It's a very good comparison where EMDR, and I'm not a therapist, so I may be wrong as far as, but EMDR kind of focuses on feeling that trauma in various parts of your body and then releasing it. And this can have a similar effect where while you're in that space, you can look at that trauma, examine it, kind of let it go. So it's similar. And actually Candace actually does EMDR therapy, and she's, I don't know, just to speak on her draw towards this, she had, patients that would go to ketamine clinic that were really stuck in therapy, and they'd go do ketamine, come back, and just do, all of a sudden they're unblocked. They're kind of unsticking themselves, I guess, and doing a lot better work in therapy. So. So that was kind of her impetus for exploring ketamine as a treatment option.
So the thinking is that this sort of frees my brain from the way it is normally, so that I can deal with some things I'm trying to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some people describe it as hitting the reset button to a degree. There's prevailing theories on how it works. I mean, there's a theory that, what I said as far as neurogenesis of creating new connections and rewiring old neural pathways to be able to look at things in a different way. There's also a theory that it creates kind of a mystical experience, and for whatever reason, it's an almost, I'll just call it a spiritual experience where some of those things that had control over you before maybe don't seem as pressing or as intense, and really all of these things this is a fairly new type of treatment, so all of these prevailing theories are being studied, but they are theories. I mean, if we're being honest, I think there's a gap of knowledge where we don't really know how it works. But we do know it works well. Our personal experience, I think a lot of data suggests that it works well. It's not a magic wand. I mean, you still have to do the hard work. You have to, say if you were doing it for addiction, you still have to go to your meetings, you still have to go to therapy, treatment. This can just be a catalyst to kind of help you do better work there. So,
Is there a danger?
well, yes. I mean, well, as you mentioned, it is an abusable medicine. So, some people that don't want to live in their body or in the waking world, it's very appealing because, you do feel out of your body, and for some people, that's more comfortable space than kind of facing whatever they need to work through. However, when it's done in a professional setting, where you have professionals following you and tracking you, and I don't see a lot of abuse, even with psychedelics. Like I said, I did admissions for Highland Ridge and for House of Hope for a while, and not of my days doing that, I don't remember ever admitting somebody for a psychedelic dependency. However, there's abusability danger there. So
I'm going to ask the hard question, like, why, because people are going to be wondering, right? And I'm wondering, like, why, if you're doing it for substance dependency, like, why in the world would somebody come in and do it? But it's going to be similar to the same question as a Medicaid-assisted treatment, right?
Yeah.
Like, how is the process? Like, why would somebody come and do ketamine, right? And what is the process? Is it short-term or long-term? Do you come weekly? Do you send them home? Describe that process and why it could be beneficial and effective, in your opinion.
Yeah. So for all those, so I mean, let's take substance abuse for example. There are usually underlying reasons why you self-medicate, right? I mean, there's depression, there's trauma, and so somebody. So why would you give it to somebody who has an issue with addiction, assuming they've already detoxed, they're in treatment? The short answer is to prevent relapse, right? So you're able to let them work on those underlying issues that may trigger, even maybe give them a catalyst or insight into those triggers that may lead to relapse, and be able to work on those issues, trauma, depression, whatever, to kind of maintain sobriety. And that would be the theoretical reason for using ketamine for addiction. The process isn't a medication you take every day. Most providers, we base our program on a good study that did a series of 6 treatments. You do those together for 6 treatments in
Weekly
a row.
or monthly or
Bi-weekly, sometimes weekly. So you do them in a close group of time. Then you stop doing it, and then you take a break and see what it brings out for you, what it's a catalyst for. So that's kind of the process. Yeah.
so you're saying it could work in conjunction with somebody going through treatment for substance use.
Yeah, absolutely. Be an adjunct therapy. Not ketamine alone wouldn't be recommended as a treatment.
Because I got a call once from a friend of mine who they were concerned about their kid, and the kid didn't want to go into a program like Odyssey or something like that. And he said he's reading about ketamine treatment. And he's thinking of doing that, and I didn't even know how to answer. If I ask you the same thing, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say this could augment what you're doing in treatment, but as monotherapy, I want to quit using heroin, for example. Would ketamine stop me from doing that? No, it would be something to support what you're doing in therapy and treatment, whatever type of program you're in. and that would be that's where I would see the benefit. And keep in mind, this isn't a type of treatment that has a long track history. Like if you go back a ways, like Anabuse or naltrexone or something like that, there's not a lot of history. But this would be a therapeutic tool, but this would be an answer in and of itself. So, yep.
We were talking before this started, and I thought you have a long history. So I would like to bring that out. Like, what got you involved and interested in this?
So, yes, like I mentioned previously, in my 20s, I decided I wanted to work in a field that helped people, and I started in kind of the late 90s working at VOA as a detox tech, and I worked there for a couple years, and I got some degrees in psychology and sociology, and started working at the U in their behavioral hospital as a psych tech, and decided I wouldn't be a good therapist, so I went into nursing. Worked at uni as a nurse for a couple years, and then moved to a critical care job. I got my graduate degree, my nurse practitioner degree from Westminster, and after I graduated, I got a job at uni in one of their new programs where we would essentially, as a prescriber there, and and then me and my brother have a family practice clinic where I do a lot of med management for depression and anxiety. And my partner at my therapy clinic, or at our ketamine clinic, had approached me about, she had some patients that weren't doing well in therapy. I had some patients that medications weren't really effective, and so we about 3 years ago, we started trying ketamine for depression and anxiety and for trauma for patients. And, we had really good results, and it's kind of grown from there. We've kind of changed the way we do it a little bit to make it a little more client-centered, a little more comfortable, but essentially that's how we started doing ketamine for patients.
I'm glad you asked that, so that
Yeah.
people watching might think he's like Timothy Leary, the drug guru from back in the 60s or something.
No, it's a good reference, but no, we're like I said, my partner's a licensed clinical social worker. She's got a long history of working with patients with PTSD. Even though I'm a family nurse practitioner, a lot of work history in areas of psych and med management. So.
I'm trying to think of a practical application here. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and for decades, when I'd go through living life and some of the bad things that would happen, well, almost on a daily basis, my response would be to drink to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, now I've been clean for 10 years now, but I still occasionally think about drinking when something bad happens. Yeah. Would something like this treatment help me get rid of that thought process that, oops, Rachel looked at me crooked, I need to have a beer, and get rid of that process that goes on in my brain?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, I think this could be very helpful for what you're describing. I think what you're describing is the thinking area, or the thinking errors that sometimes people in recovery have, where whether that's like rationalization or whatever it is that the kind of pulls at them to kind of relapse and to drink or whatever. And a medicine like ketamine could really put you in that space to examine those thinking errors in a safe, comfortable space. And yeah, it could actually prevent a relapse in that case. Studies always have their problems, but one thing that studies have shown, even in this beginning stage, is the prevention of relapse is a benefit from ketamine. And don't get me wrong, I don't suggest using ketamine for detoxing or when you're in that stage of detoxing, but maintaining sobriety is where I see a big practical application, just from being able to examine your own consciousness, look at your own thinking areas or thinking errors, and be able to kind of look at things a different way, basically.
An obvious question, because this is not covered by insurance, right?
Right.
Or accepted by Medicaid or Medicare or any of that. So it's cash pay.
Yes.
So what does this cost?
Most people charge between $200 and about $500. We charge $300 for an IM injection approximately, and that's because we have the support staff to kind of be with you during the process and kind of help you process. But yeah, so that is an unfortunate thing with this, is because accessibility can be limited. It's considered accessibility can be limited based on your finances, obviously, and that's a detriment. But this is considered an off-label use of for ketamine. Ketamine's primary use is for anesthesia, so that's why insurances won't cover it. It's actually a very inexpensive medicine because it's been around since the 60s. It's been around forever. That's essentially the politics involved in why it has to be cash pay. Most of it's just paying. Most of the cost is for the providers to be able to provide the service. Yeah.
Do you ever see a future where something like this would be included, like with MAT, with medication-assisted treatment, and being accepted by agencies like Medicaid and other insurances, and maybe Odyssey House? And I'm not saying that it'll ever happen, but I never thought it would happen that Odyssey would
Yeah.
change from being an abstinence-based program to
Absolutely.
accepting Suboxone and Vivitrol and things like that. Could you see this in the future?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I don't consider myself an expert in addictions, but I do see that being, I remember my early days, with 12-step based programs, very strict on abstinence,
Right.
and even my time working at House of Hope, I started to see Suboxone being used to kind of help maintain sobriety. In some ways, I think if this is a tool that through study turns out to help maintain sobriety, I do find that it could potentially be, a valuable medicine just like those as far as that goes. And I think you're already seeing it being used potentially in other medicines like MDMA and psilocybin, potentially being used for therapeutic, for more one-on-one therapy sessions, like, where they may give you a lower dose of the medicine that just kind of helps you be in an open state where you can actually communicate with your therapist and be able to talk through sessions. I see that potential happening in treatment for PTSD and for depression. I can also see that, if that's successful, that moving into addiction medicine as well. So I do see a bright potential positives for ketamine and other medicines like it to be therapeutic. And like we said previously, ketamine right now is legal and is to use and should only be used obviously with professionals, but I see other applications, and I've heard people talk about that potential as well. Prior to Medicaid expansion in the late 60s, early 70s, there's a history of using different medicines in conjunction with therapy.
Yeah.
That kind of went away after Nixon, after the counterculture and everything. But I do see that in like shamanic traditions, in like other cultures where they use medicines with ceremony to kind of, I'm assuming for healing and for people to have a connection with community, various reasons. So, yeah, I do see a really positive potential for it. Yep.
So
There-
when you
Go ahead.
when you have a lot of trauma, or just when you have trauma, oftentimes you block that memory, or you can't get to that source because it's so blocked and embedded. So this is a way that you could actually open up and get to that source to identify or address that trauma.
Yeah. So, your operating system and the way, or your ego, the way Freud intended it, that part of your brain that has all your defense mechanisms, that kind of block you off from that trauma, compartmentalize it. When you're in that space, when you're in that dissociative space, that your ego, in the Freudian sense, kind of goes offline, and you're in some ways you're kind of forced to look at that and have access to that, when sometimes when you're in your when your ego's online, it's preventing you, and that serves a function. If you have a traumatic experience, in order to survive that, you do kind of need to compartmentalize it, but you eventually have to deal with that later, or it interferes in your life, So that's kind of how, that's a theory that I have as far as how it can help with trauma. It kind of puts you in an open space to be able to, where you're normally blocked off from that trauma, to be able to examine it in a safe space with people that you feel safe with. Sometimes that can be very scary, though. I mean, it can be very hard. Be a very hard session, but once you come back to yourself, patients usually feel better, even if they had to look at that for half hour to an hour.
Well, it'd be the importance of your team and why you have your team around while you do it.
Yeah, it's nice to have that support when you come through it, be able to talk about it, and it seems to not have that power over you that it had before.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
There's been a lot of, one of the reasons I reached out is there's been growing publicity over ketamine clinics, and they're expanding in the Salt Lake Valley. It's a growing thing.
Yeah. It has taken on some, it's kind of starting to be pretty prevalent in the culture, and I think there's good and bad to that. I did hear a psychiatrist at uni as part of a group there that would discuss psychedelics or alternate medicines, and he referred to ketamine right now as being the Wild West, and that's the pros of that, or it does make it accessible, but the cons of that are, there's definitely different ways of looking at it, how it's effective, and one side, over-regulation could be a negative thing. On the other side, some regulation probably. So I don't know where I land on that spectrum, but so I do think it should be taken with reverence, I guess, and careful consideration. And there have been patients I've told that I don't think ketamine is going to be helpful for them. They need to do some work in therapy first, but I know we all have our probably different nuances to our philosophy on it. But it has kind of exploded as far as the amount of ketamine clinics that have popped up since we started doing it. Yeah.
So you don't just take anybody in. I come in and I say, hey, I've got the cash, I want to do some ketamine. You talk to them first and figure out why I want to do the ketamine.
Yeah, exactly. We do. We've had some. Yeah, we do talk to them, find out what they're here to pull out of it. And we have said, I think today is not the right time, and we give them our professional opinion. You need to maybe engage in therapy and kind of start doing some work there. For example, I've had people come in where I've felt like they may be intoxicated, and I'm like, we're not going to be doing this today. You need to get into therapy or treatment, and then after you've had some sobriety and you do feel like this may work for you, then we can discuss it. So,
Gotcha.
So that would be one example. But there are other times, yes, I've either me or my partner feel like it's not appropriate. We've said no, it's not appropriate treatment for you.
We're almost out of time. How about you plug your clinic just so we can, because people are going to watch us and say, where do I go? What do I do? And it's called Therapeutic Alternatives, right?
Yes, Therapeutic Alternatives, and our website's ktherapyslc.com.
And you're located where?
Our ketamine clinic's located downtown on 4th East and about 1st South, so on the second floor.
They're only a block from our administration
I
building.
know, I was just thinking that.
It's the building.
Can you come down and we'll all do ketamine for lunch and see how the staff does?
I mean, I don't know what that would bring up for you guys, but
I don't think it'd be a good idea.
We'll come up with a plan. Yeah, no, but yeah. So that's basically it. I do appreciate you guys having me. It's an honor actually to work.
Yeah, I thought this was great. I'm glad that I got to learn more because I had my assumptions and I love being educated. So thank you for being on the show to educate us.
It's been very educational for me too, because we work with this every day, as have you for years, and this is, like you said, could be like the wild, wild west, or it could be a really beneficial thing as we march forward.
Yeah, and I'm glad that I can educate the community better too, because I think there's always going to be things that come out, and I think that people are like, oh, I'll just get on ketamine. Well, hey, that might be an option for you, right?
Yeah.
And also these other things too. So now I'm a lot more educated and understanding. So thank you for being here. That was cool.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Our guest has been Austin Francom from Therapeutic Alternatives.
Yeah.
And you described it well, and you've enlightened all of us, so we appreciate it.
Well,
So,
I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
thank you for watching another edition of Odyssey House Journals.